A real pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be with you.
I'll be dead honest. I have probably interviewed every single person in Maha that is committed to changing the food, that is committed to looking at vaccines and having vaccine, safety testing, transparency. We've all heard it 1,000 times before. But I haven't really had an opportunity to speak with anybody at the EPA. And if I could be, and if I could be completely frank, when you look at these skyrocketing statistics of disease, whether it's infertility, 30-year-old men that have the testosterone level a 50-year-old man had 30 years ago, the biggest and scariest one, early onset cancer diagnoses in people 18 to 49, up 79%, and the list goes on and on and on. Without question, it has something to do with the chemical onslaught we take on from food, water, air, and so on. And this is you. So we've got this big Maha Report. Can you tell me what's in it, what the ramifications are for the EPA, and what you guys are going to do based off what's in this report?
If I was to say one thing, I would emphasize how important it is to have sound science, to research, to be transparent with that research, to make sure that we're making decisions based on all available evidence and we're communicating that transparently with the public. So when we came in just a few months ago, there were these massive backlogs with the chemical review, with the pesticide review. We need to get all of that caught up. And there was two main things that we've been doing to get that done. One was increasing bandwidth. We're adding more scientists.
Oh, great. Okay.
And then the second piece is the IT was so outdated. So we're getting it caught up. We're going to use AI. We're using systems that would crash and be down for days. So we inherited a pesticide review backlog of 14,000.
That's extremely disturbing.
Not 14. Not 1,400, 14,000. Now we've already gotten over 2,300 of those pesticides with that backlog. We got that cut down, but we want to get rid of the backlog. The new chemical review, the backlog was about 500. We want to get rid of the backlog with the chemical review. Now, chemistry is in every aspect of our life. I mean, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. Your audience wouldn't be able to tune in if not for all sorts of positive scientific contributions to American innovation. We care about American agriculture and our food supply. We also have to make sure that we're relying on sound science and we're being transparent with the public.
Well, first of all, you said 14,000 pesticides.
14,000.
How is it even possible
Crazy.
that you would need 14,000 different chemicals for crops? That seems like madness.
Well, the farmers rely on a few in particular.
Right, glyphosate and...
Right, and so on National Agriculture Day, I was just outside of St. Louis at a farm, and this particular farm had amazing infrastructure on their equipment where they were able to make sure that they're getting the most precise application of a particular pesticide and not an ounce extra, not anything going, an extra foot here or foot there. So I was then in Georgia a couple weeks ago, and I'm with their farmers, and I'm like, hey, I was just in St. Louis on National Ag Day, and I start talking through this equipment. One farmer says, yeah, that's great. I would love to be able to use that on my farm. However, what you're referring to would cost me $75,000.
Exactly, right. So now what do you do? Because so much of our tax dollars go in subsidies to GMO crops and to pay for these chemicals and, on the food side and the big ag side. Are you guys able to change policy so that our tax dollars are subsidizing the purchase of this kind of equipment? Because if not, you're saying, I'm sure, that to ban all of these things would be virtually impossible, I imagine, right? Like start over, you can't ban 14,000 chemicals.
Yeah, I mean, you start looking at what are the alternatives and what's the cost. So you start asking the American consumer, how much do you want to spend for your strawberries? Because one option might be a lot less than the organic strawberry alternative right next to it. And by the way, not close, like a big difference between the two. So you have that piece as far as the concern of the American consumer. And as you look to the future, what are the alternatives, and are the alternatives better, and if they're better, how so? Okay. And we have to study. We have to study this stuff more, and we have to be more transparent. with the public. I want to, and President Trump wants, and Secretary Kennedy wants to be more transparent with the public. Another example is fluoride in drinking water. So Secretary Kennedy comes into office, first topic, as soon as he was nominated and I was nominated, he reaches out right away and he wants to start working together. Great. So we start talking about it. Well, July of 2024 was the last time that EPA reviewed the science on fluoride. But the National Toxicology Program came out with a result in August of 2024, not considered in EPA's most recent research. It came out a month later that showed with moderate confidence that fluoride over a certain amount would cause a lower IQ in children.
Right, I've seen
Secretary
studies.
Kennedy's concerned about it.
Yes.
So when we were in Salt Lake City, Utah together, just a few weeks ago, we announced that EPA is now going to go back, look at the National Toxicology Program study, as well as other peer-reviewed studies. And we are going to work with Health and Human Services to make the right decision based off of the available science. What a crazy concept. Look at all of the science. No bias, by the way. I don't want any scientist inside the agency to have any bias. Just, we want the facts, we want the data, and we want to make the right decision.
Why do you think there's so much pushback on that? Because I can tell you that I personally have had an argument about fluoride, and this is never a hill that I wanted to die on. I just simply became aware of the concerns with adding fluoride to the water because different doctors in different specialties of medicine were sounding the alarm bell. Endocrinologists were talking about issues with thyroid because it could impair iodine utilization and so on and so forth. And people don't want to hear it, and they push back because Trump. How are you guys planning on fighting that? So let's say the data bears out fluoride should not be ingested. Topical application is one thing, but drinking it is another. And you guys say we're removing it from the water. And then California riots in the streets. Then what happens? Because I wouldn't be surprised, I'll be honest.
Some states are starting to take action. Utah has banned fluoride in drinking water, and other states are moving legislation to do the same. We want to advance cooperative federalism. That's one of the principles of the Trump EPA. That means working more with the states. There are states out there that don't need to wait for EPA to give them any update based on further review. There are other states that want to get the analysis done as quickly as possible. And it's important for us to just lay it all out there.
I get it. You're presenting the evidence.
No matter what it is, it can fit. Here we're talking about fluoride. But you could go into a question and say, I definitely want to, at the end of this, push for fluoride in drinking water, or I definitely want to push for removing fluoride in drinking water. And then you go out looking for the science to support your argument. With everything that is in front of us, I don't want to bring that bias to my question. My question is, put all the science in front of us without any type of bias, without any type of agenda, and let's shoot straight with the American public so these states that are out there can make decisions for themselves as to, and here we're talking about fluoride, but this applies to so much. And the other thing too is labels and warning. I'm not going to say that you should be taking shots of a particular chemical that just should not be ingested, but that chemical that obviously should not be ingested might be needed to make that iPhone in some factory somewhere where they're using it in accordance with the label and instructions that the chemists are bringing their talent that they're trained on to use it to make that next great innovation. And the other thing that we want to be clear in communicating to the American public is the U.S. food supply is the safest in the world. So we don't want...
When you say that, what do you mean? Because I would argue that's not the case.
So the U.S. food supply...
You mean like pathogens?
You have all sorts of... Well, like in consuming food here in the U.S., when you look at our standards in the U.S., compared to so many other countries all around the world, you go look at standards of like these big countries like India or China, and Russia and elsewhere.
Do you mean like for food chemicals, or do you mean
the whole process?
Inspecting for salmonella?
The way,
because we have chemicals in our food here that are now famously not permitted, in other parts of the developed world, like the EU and Canada and so on and so forth. Like the obvious Kennedy in front of the Fruit Loop moment comes to mind.
Yeah, so there are so many other countries, I would say start to finish when you look at the process, from the way the farmers do their crop protection, crop production, the way that it's that it's processed, the way that it's packaged, the way that it's brought to the consumer. So now this is the key. This is what Secretary Kennedy is focused on.
I think we're the worst.
Well, no. So this is.
How do we process seed oils? All the plastics in the food, all of the chemicals that make it through the grass
Kennedy
roll,
is very
that kind of
focused
stuff.
on. We have to figure out any way possible to make things healthier.
Oh, yes.
We have so much to consider. We don't want to strangulate the economy. We don't want to tell that American citizen that they have to spend now, like starting tomorrow, it's now going to cost you 2.5 times as much to purchase
this.
X.
Right.
So let's work with all the parties that are involved. Let's make sure that we're reviewing all of the science. Let's be transparent with the public, and let's make America healthier. And there are countless ways to be able to do that. Now, as far as the Make America Healthy Again Commission report that's being released today, EPA has the most amount of equities in developing that section as it relates to chemicals and pesticides. Right. But there's a lot that the Secretary has been focused on, Secretary Kennedy. He's concerned about childhood obesity. He's concerned. Do you know anything about combating obesity? I read one or two something in your bio.
It's new to me, but yeah. I'm working on learning more.
Diabetes, autism. Right now, 75% of young adults in this country aren't eligible for military service. How crazy is that?
I do know that.
So there's a lot to focus on.
But I would argue the following, and I understand all of that, and I can always make a case, speaking of obesity, that people should take agency. Eat less and move more, and all of that works if the food wasn't, of course, engineered to be as addictive and we didn't have psychological vulnerabilities that were exploited by the toxic triad of ag, food, and pharma. However, even when I look at myself, knowing everything I know about food, I'm not at home, I'm away. I go to a coffee shop, I get my coffee, and I'm like, there's plastic in the lining of this paper cup, and I just poured hot coffee into it today and tomorrow and the next day. On top of, I'm at a hotel. Their products, the cleaning products, all that stuff, chemicals. And when I look at the reasons that I might have nodules on my thyroid, or I might have little white matter lesions on my brain, or God forbid I get cancer in the next 10 years, I promise you it won't be a lack of exercise or eating salad. So it's the crap that you, to be fair, not to lay this at your feet, are solely responsible for that I think is going to make the biggest difference, because the most responsible person cannot mitigate this toxic load in a significant enough way. Yeah. It's in the water, it's in the air, it's in everything we package our food in. So I think it's just in this report, is there anything that will facilitate your ability to remove some of that crap? That really is the question.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'm also working with Secretary Kennedy on a PFAS, which is called forever chemicals.
Yes.
And there are 15,000 different chemicals that are called PFAS. But the research and data is most advanced on some of the chemicals, not all, and research is going on with all of it. Now, the two forms of PFAS that the research and data are most advanced is on PFOA and PFOS. There's a standard coming in at 4 parts per trillion. That is the maximum contaminant load. So that's the rule that's coming online. And the great news for local drinking water systems that want to come into compliance is that I have, over the course of the last few months, had so many different individuals and companies reaching out to EPA talking about their innovation to be able to combat PFAS, to break down the forever chemical, to be able to treat this water. And that's a pretty big deal. We want innovation to allow to bring the cost down so that drinking water systems all across the country can be able to combat this PFAS, which the research and data is very far along on PFOA and PFOS, and we need to catch up with that research and data with the other forms of PFAS.
I was just interviewing a doctor that specializes in autoimmune conditions, and her number one tip was you've got to filter your water, and like with a reverse osmosis filter because of everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then you think about, okay, well, people are bathing in it, they're cooking in it, they can't afford the reverse osmosis filter, and how much exposure are they getting day after day after day? Brushing their teeth, cooking their pasta, drinking the tap water, taking that shower. So that would be massive and extremely exciting. If I could ask you one more question.
You can ask me anything.
I appreciate that. President Trump, listen, there are parts about his policy that I love. I'll be fair. I really have been so impressed with many different things that he has taken on. But his approach to the environment is questionable.
Fantastic. It's great. I agree. I agree with you that his approach. So President Trump,
he's rolled back so much of the protections with regard to the EPA.
So here's the thing. One is an important principle for us, the Trump EPA, is that we believe that you can protect the environment and grow the economy. President Trump talks about wanting clean air, land, and water for all Americans. That is an important goal. Americans want cleaner, safer, healthier land, air, and water. We inherited what was a big mess because over the course of the last year or two of the Biden administration, there were all different kinds of regulations that were rushed out of the door seeking to strangulate out of existence entire industries. So the American public last November spoke saying that they have economic concerns.
True.
They are paying too much to heat their home, to buy a car. They want choice. They don't like an electric vehicle mandate. While we're sitting here having this conversation, like right now, the United States Senate is voting on a Congressional Review Act resolution to get rid of the Biden EPA waiver to California to create the electric vehicle mandate. The House already passed it, Senate's passing it, and then it goes to the president for his signature. Americans spoke up. Now, you could say that if you were, if not you, but it was like someone else in the media wanted to make the argument that you're attacking the environment by sending these Biden-era EPA waivers to Congress for consideration under the Congressional Review Act, by eliminating California's tailpipe emissions, their vehicle rules. That argument can get made. However, I would argue that if you want to go buy a gas-powered vehicle, you should be able to go buy a gas-powered vehicle. If your neighbor wants to buy an electric vehicle, they should be able to buy an electric vehicle. What I don't like is the idea that you should be saying that everyone has to buy the electric vehicle. You come from the other coast in California, I come from New York. Now the two states are in this competition for who can lead the country in out-migration. I mean, they're pushing people and businesses and more out of the states for good.
You're completely correct.
New York also wants to move towards banning gas-powered vehicles. They won't allow the safe extraction of natural gas. They oppose pipeline projects, which the left also admits is a safer way to transport energy than truck or train. They won't allow the gas-powered hookups for new construction. They actually argue that an intermittent form of energy, wind, is a substitute for baseload power. Like, we don't need more baseload power if we just build enough wind farms. So now we have I'm bringing up a really good example of what is a philosophical difference, where one would say, well, that means that you hate the environment. No, the American public has a voice in this. We don't come to Washington and thumb our nose at what the American public demands. The Trump mandate is saying that there are economic concerns that need attention, and that just because a state like New York wants to put all these rules in place, there's a whole lot of other states that don't want to do it. And that doesn't mean that all of these other states hate the environment. There's actually a big source of bipartisan support all across this country wanting cleaner, safer, healthier land, air, and water. Now, we might disagree on individual policies, but the hyperbolic rhetoric that if you don't agree with me on California's electric vehicle mandate, that means that you hate the environment, is a very dishonest way to approach a debate. Try to win the argument on the merits as opposed to the hyperbolic rhetoric.
That is a complex debate, and I have seen a ton of information that conflicts on whether or not EVs are even better for the environment, whether or not they're ethical. If you've got children in these dystopian conditions mining for these minerals in parts of the developing world, and it's arguably, you bury these batteries after 10 years and they're flammable, and we all know that California is prone to wildfires. Like, I can definitely see the nuance in these conversations, the right to choice for Americans, but the polluting that these monster corporations are being permitted to do, the allowing of rollbacks on regulating those guys.
Oh, so here's
who could
good
push
news.
back on that?
So here's something else that they won't tell you.
Okay.
Is that when I came in, it was about a week or two ago, I asked my team, I want to see the comparison from January 20th, Inauguration Day, 2025, to May 7th. That just happened to be the day just before I made this request. I want to see the data for 2025 compared to the same exact period from January 20th to May 7th of 2024.
Okay.
And I found this massive increase between the Biden EPA and the Trump EPA in the amount of contaminated soil that was removed. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of tons, hundreds of thousands. This is massive. I was looking at the enforcement, and there was a close to $0 number with enforcement against polluters compared to an over $1 billion figure was the total in the same period in 2025. We're doing our jobs in enforcing the laws that are on the book, but the left doesn't want to mention at all this massive ramp up that we have seen year over year with all of the remediation, like removing contaminated soil, to enforcement where there are fines that have been placed on entities that have polluted. And I would also
So Trump has maintained all of that, you're saying,
he actually,
that Biden had in place. If
the
not,
collections have increased.
Then tell me, how are people allowed to promote that narrative that Trump has just said to all his cronies and these monster billion-dollar corporations, like, go ahead, put whatever you want in the water, dump whatever you want in the air, let's make money. I mean, that is absolutely what people are interpreting, myself included, to be fair.
You have a massive following. There are a lot of people who are listening to us talk right now, and I bet you this is not news for many of them that not everything the New York Times and Washington Post says and Politico says is all accurate, and that's why they tune into you, to be able to cut through it, to be able to get the rest of the story.
It's the rollback. It's like, okay, I'm going to roll back this law that says you can't dump this chemical in the water. Then people are like, well, then 2 + 2 = 4. If you're rolling back that regulation, one would assume then that these big corporations are no longer being careful where they dump chemicals. That would be.
Can I give you another example?
Please do.
Okay, so there's something called MATS. It stands for Mercury and Air Toxic Standards. It's related to coal power plants. So towards the end of the Biden administration, they created a new MATS standard that was just basically trying to put every coal plant out. They were trying to create a compliance standard that'd just be impossible for so many of these plants to even meet. So when we announced on March 12th that we were going to reconsider that rule, the way that the left took it was that they start telling the public that there's not going to be any more mercury and air toxic standards. What they don't point out is that, crazy enough, believe it or not, before last year, there already were mercury and air toxic standards on the books that these plants had to abide by. So be honest with the public. Listen, if you want to weigh in with a reconsideration of a rule, there's a public comment period, speak up. If you have technical data, great. That helps us make the right decision. But it's important for the media and and members of Congress to be honest with the public. Just because you can reconsider a brand new MATS rule from the end of the Biden administration doesn't mean that there aren't all sorts of other standards regarding mercury and air toxic standards that are already on the books regardless of that reconsideration. All I ask for is for people to be honest. And here's, I'll give you another example, is that if we say that we're going to reconsider a rule, just some general rule, let's say we're going to reconsider a rule, the left will respond by showing some picture of water, a river from the 1960s, and say, look at them, if they get rid of that rule, this is what the water is going to look like again. It's like, if you want to be accurate with your attack, you should actually show a picture of that waterway 12 months ago. And in some cases, by the way, they're talking about rules that haven't even gone into effect yet. So the whole picture comparison isn't even accurate. On the 100th day of the Trump administration, the Trump EPA released a list of 100 environmental wins from the first 100 days. And it includes cleaning up the Los Angeles wildfires, over 13,000 buildings that were destroyed.
I personally have to give that to you. I know that's been federal, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has already cleaned up half of it, where half of the mess, I think, is half cleaned up. With that said, the state of California has only pushed through 12 building permits since then.
Yeah.
So I must say, appreciate that.
Yeah. So President Trump came in, and then the wildfires had just happened days earlier. President Trump signs an executive order, and he says the EPA has 30 days to complete its phase 1 hazardous material removal so that the Army Corps, as you just referenced, can come in to do their phase 2 debris removal.
Yes.
The initial reaction was, that's impossible. Well, actually, it wasn't impossible. We got it done in less than 30 days. There was a rule for the Delaware River Basin for over 30 miles to increase water quality standards. Now, I could have decided to increase the water quality standards. It'll help with the sturgeon, an endangered fish species. It'll help with other fisheries. It'll make the water cleaner. Or maybe, as is suggested by the scary voices on the other side who want to go after President Trump on everything, then in that case, maybe I go a different direction. Maybe I don't increase the water standards. Well, I increased the water quality standards. Wasn't done previously. It was done this year. Where's all the reporting on that? Everything we're doing to clean up the Tijuana River, the raw sewage that comes across the border. San Diego residents have been dealing with this for decades. And we're present on the ground. We just made an announcement a few days ago of increasing capacity at the South Bay Treatment International Plant. The San Antonio de los Buenos site in Mexico just finished up. That's 18 million gallons per day. We're working with the Mexicans for them to move 10 million gallons per day that were going in Tijuana River to instead move to the Tijuana Dam. Like, we're on the ground actually working on all of this stuff all across the entire map. And all the left wants to talk about is their hyperbolic conclusion to try to score a political point and to create a wedge issue. And along those lines, that's why today, EPA, along with other agencies, but led by Health and Human Services and Secretary Kenny, we're releasing the Make America Healthy Again Commission report, which is going to cover a lot of the topics that we're talking about here. And there's other topics we're talking about here that aren't even part of the report. And we're going to tackle all of it. Because that's what the American public's demanding.
That in fact, all the things we're talking about is like, we found that contaminated water, contaminated air, contaminated food, blah, 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 is making people sick. Can I presume that's what's in this report? And then here's how we're tackling it, much of what you've just shared with me now.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of this report is identifying what needs to get done.
Got it.
There's going to be a follow-up report that goes into all different kinds of next steps.
Okay.
We're not waiting for the next report to start working on next steps. Some of what you see in the report, a lot of what you see in the report, there's all sorts of next steps that are already underway, including a lot of what we have been discussing here during this conversation. And I don't want anyone to be here listening to this conversation and reading the report and then thinking, okay, they're not going to come out of their house. They're not going to, live their life. It's the end of the world. What we all need to do in this moment to meet the moment is to do everything in our power to make America healthier than ever. Yeah. We want to inform parents to make the best decisions possible and to set their kids up to have a longer life expectancy than our generation. It's a duty of us to make sure that our kids and their generation have a longer life expectancy than ours. And that means that we're going to have to do everything better. That is an important mandate earned by the demand of the American public.
Can I ask 2 more questions?
Sure.
Okay, the one that people love to point to, the Paris Climate Accord. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. He is a savage. He is an animal. He's a greedy monster that thinks only of his cronies. This is a top criticism of the left for years now since it happened way back in his first term. How would you combat that to the person making that critique?
The biggest polluters across the planet, around the world, people who are contaminating, by the way, air in the United States, it's coming from international sources.
China,
in many
India.
respects. You reference China.
Right.
There are these countries like China, India, and elsewhere that in the Paris Climate Accords weren't committing towards stepping up to the plate and increasing the standards and doing their part to eliminate pollution. As a matter of fact, they were they were consenting, they were offering to put more pollution into the air. Now, how is that celebrated like it's a good thing? So we unilaterally here in the United States say, we're going to hold ourselves to the gold standard. And in return, China, you can continue to make the problem worse. Now, I have to deal with, at EPA, I have statutory obligations to deal with the ozone attainment, that the attainment status of these different states across the country. And in many respects, the reason why Arizona and Utah are having issues, and others are having issues with reaching attainment in their air quality is from international sources. So if we are serious about helping the people of Maricopa County, Arizona, to be able to deal with their challenges with air quality, if you're going to enter into a Paris Climate Accord that you're going to hold up as saying, hey, look, this great deal. Congratulations, people of Maricopa County. We fought for you. They're going to look at these international sources and say, well, what are you getting them to commit to? And they're going to be bothered by it. President Trump made the right call to pull out of it. If you're going to enter into one of these deals, it needs to be a deal that is fighting for Americans who are demanding action as opposed to what some were holding up as being a victory and it wasn't.
I do appreciate the fact that he has been highlighting these international deals and agreements that are in fact not reciprocal. The most evident right now being the tariffs. And for the first time, you're seeing these huge asymmetries in trade that the average bear like myself really did not understand or know about. And it's interesting to find a similarity here. And I had heard that, but I really didn't fully flush it out. And it's something that I hear, again, argued and put forward by the left on a regular basis. So thank you for clearing that up. I can't help but ask this because you brought up the ozone layer. And on a regular basis, you'll hear people going back and forth in the climate change debate. Being a bigwig at the EPA, is it real or not?
Well, it's the Clean Air Act, which is a landmark historic law that's been on the book for decades, which creates all sorts of statutory obligations for EPA. It's something that, by the way, hasn't been updated in a long time, but that's besides the point. It's for a whole other conversation. It sets these different it declares these different pollutants that EPA has to set standards and regulations to make sure that we're protecting the air. That's one of the most important components, or maybe the most important component of the Clean Air Act, is going after stuff like ozone, lead, and more.
Right.
With regards to ozone, a state, an area will either be in attainment or they're not in attainment. Now, if they're non-attainment, it's not just one big category of non-attainment. They could be in a moderate state. They could be in a serious state of non-attainment. And we work with these states. So one of the changes that the Trump EPA is making is that inside of our Office of Air and Radiation, we're creating an office for state air partnerships. One of the backlogs we inherited, earlier we were talking about pesticides and chemicals.
That's insane.
One of the backlogs we inherited was with state implementation plans. So since President Trump was inaugurated, I have gotten 25 state implementations over the finish line, 16 of which were backlogged from the last administration. Now, a state like Arizona, they'll have a community that if they go zero emission, they have no vehicles on the road. They go zero emission, they're still having an issue meeting attainment. Why? Because of these international sources that need to be dealt with. So when you talk ozone, a lot of what is impacting the ozone above us here in the United States is being impacted by other countries, like we were talking earlier, China.
You're saying it is real, then? That climate change is real.
So climate change has been around
But
forever.
You know, they love
okay,
the narrative. This isn't real. This is all a hoax. And Al Gore was the first climate change billionaire. It's very hard to disseminate what's real.
So
you can
this is-
see environmental pollution, but the climate change conversation, you'll have brilliant minds come out and tell you, no, nothing to see here. When you're, again, an average bear, you don't even know how to disseminate the science.
Yeah, the climate has always been changing, and then you have an industrialization of the population.
Right. Okay.
Man starts contributing more than it did previously.
Right.
And then you start studying what is
Causing
being
it.
emitted.
Oh, I see.
And causing is one word in the Clean Air Act. Contribute is an error inside of the Clean Air Act. What is it causing? What is the endangerment to human health? And something that was done in 2009, towards the beginning of the Obama administration, is that they reached an endangerment finding on carbon dioxide and 5 other gases that are called the 6 well-mixed gases or greenhouse gases.
Right.
And they said that, now they didn't study the gases individually. I think they should have. And they examined them collectively, and then they said that it contributes, not causes, it contributes to climate change. And then they say climate change endangers human health. And then fast forward to 2025, people will want to just dumb everything down that I just said, and
Yes.
they'll say
Absolutely.
carbon dioxide endangers public health. Well, carbon dioxide is actually very critical for the survival of the planet. The Earth's life cycle, so much is needed. We wouldn't be having this conversation if not for carbon dioxide. And this goes back to our conversation about science. Let's not be biased when you go into what you're trying to show the public with the science. Let's just get it all in front of us, and let's be transparent with the public, and then they can make the right decision. So when you look at climate change and how it's really gotten to be very controversial, is that there were policies that started to get put forth over the course of these last 10 years in particular, that if you did everything in the Green New Deal, forget about increasing taxes on the wealthy, you could confiscate all of the assets of the wealthy and still not have enough money to pay for everything that's being put forth in the Green New Deal. Something else that scares the public, that President Trump is critical of, is that 6 years ago, AOC was saying that 12 years from then, the world was going to end.
Yes.
Now, the rest of us know that that's not true.
Right.
So when you hear President Trump say climate change is a hoax, what he has been most outspoken about is, in the name of climate change, being willing to bankrupt people and put economic pain on people who can least afford it. When he calls climate change a hoax, he's talking about saying that the world is about to instantly and imminently end.
I understand.
If we don't bankrupt this country. And President Trump often talks in the same breath about how important it is to have clean air, land, and water for all Americans.
People do comprehend pollution. That's clearly a way to communicate why we need to protect the environment, because they can see it with their own eyes. They can smell the air and all of that. But climate change has been a bit esoteric recently, like not quantifiable, and I really appreciate that.
Can I give you one other example?
I would love it, actually, if you have the time.
So environmental justice is a term that one might define that there's a community that's been left behind. They have an environmental issue that needs to be remediated, so let's help them.
Oh, you need. Okay.
Okay.
Who needs to go, him or me? Me at 1 o'clock? What time is it? Can I ask? Can we finish this one? Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes. We're wrapping this up. This is the one that I wanted. I was like, oh, this one I haven't done. Okay, I'm so sorry. Go. You were saying one more example.
Yeah, sure. So one other example with environmental justice, there might be a definition that one gives, that there's a community that has an environmental issue, the community's been left behind, they need that environmental issue remediated. Okay, we're all going to agree. That sounds like something that needs to get addressed. What do we do to fix it? Now, here's the problem. In the name of environmental justice, there will then be an appropriation of tens of billions of dollars where money will end up going, for example, to a advocacy group to tell us that we need to be spending the next dollar, on remediating an environmental issue. The Trump EPA believes that if there's an environmental issue that needs to be remediated, let's spend the dollar on remediating the environmental issue. Let's not spend the dollar on some group to advocate to us on where to spend the next dollar. Now, by going after that dollar that's getting spent on the advocacy group, people say, oh my gosh, look at you attacking this need to deal with this environmental issue. And no, actually, we just want to be responsible with tax dollars.
You know, we've seen that in California with the homelessness crisis, is that we've spent $24 billion and the problem's gotten roughly 30% worse, and none of the money can be accounted for. But what we know for sure is that the NGOs, they all got paid. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
Covered a lot of ground. It was good.
I really appreciate it. This has been
it.
an interview that I've been wanting to do for some time and just haven't had access to the right individual until now.
And we got to do it on a perfect day at the White House on the day that the Make America Healthy Again Commission releases its report. So what a better moment for us to get together. There is no better moment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.